This week on Act Out, a special inside look at 2020. How do we know what the Dems will do with their overcrowded playing field? Well, because we've seen these plays before. Nick Brana, founder of the Movement for a People's Party, joins us to lay out the Democratic Party's playbook based on what he's seen on the inside and built in response on the outside. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. The elections are a year and a half away, and if you've watched this show, you'll know that I've made a point of highlighting a great many other things that we really need to pay attention to besides the bloated Dem playing field and Trump's loopy fascist platform. Still, it's never a bad time to shed light on the inner workings of systemic corruption. And Nick Brana, who's been on this show before, has seen these corrupt workings really quite up close. Far closer than most of us would ever like to. So in this special episode, we're laying out the Dem playbook, not only so we can see into the future, but so we can seriously and pointedly build alternatives that work for the people, not for the self-preservation of a corrupt party. Take a look. So, I promised that I wasn't going to talk about 2020, and here we are, talking about 2020, but you have a brilliant rundown of kind of like a soothsayer version of the future based on what has happened before. So basically, so many people are running for the Democratic nomination for president, and several progressives have thrown their names into the hat. And so people are getting excited about that. But you have a very sobering and important message regarding what the Democrats have done and what they've set up to do to address progressives running for president in that party. So let's get started on this. What has happened and what will happen based on that idea?
Totally. So first of all, thanks for having me again on Act Out. It's great to be here, Eleanor.
Thank you.
And so the Democratic Party, as you said, it was kind of caught off guard in 2016 by Bernie's campaign. You know, he raised hundreds of millions of dollars. He got 13 million votes, won 23 state contests. And the Democratic Party said, it's a little too close for comfort, you know? Mm-hmm. And so they've spent the next 4 years essentially writing the rules and engineering a 2020 that is going to guarantee that a progressive candidate cannot make it through the primary. And, you know, there's a huge history there, you know, from 7 steps essentially that that progressives have tried to reform the Democratic Party over the last 4 years, and how the party has come back every single time and basically shut it down.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What's the first step in this
in this saga?
I would
call it a saga.
Yes, the cyclical saga, it seems.
It is. It's a repeat. Well, first of all, I should say I'm really glad you bring that up, because this isn't the first time that there has been an effort to reform the Democratic Party. Reforming the Democratic Party is kind of like the bane of progressives' existence in trying to do that. And the party has, over the years and decades, it has co-opted movements, it has derailed them, it has prevented them from growing into an independent voice for working people. And so we've seen, you know, kind of an analog of that over the past 4 years with Bernie's resurgence into the Democratic Party. You know, there have been waves before, like Jesse Jackson and others, you know, that have tried to reform the Democratic Party. And so this latest wave, beginning in 2016 with Bernie's run, emerging from that, the first effort was, well, let's give it a shot again inside the Democratic Party to nominate a progressive president. And the party, in response to that, it said, you know, first of all, you know, it has a superdelegate system. There were 400 superdelegates, which was the majority of them, that were already committed essentially to Hillary Clinton before Bernie even entered the race.
And you know that from personal experience.
Yeah, because my job on Bernie's campaign in 2016 as the National Political Outreach Coordinator was to lobby the superdelegates for Bernie and try to get support from them.
And a lot of them, as you've noted before, even on the show, were just like, nope, just gonna go with Hillary. Thanks, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that gets into what the DNC is and what the Democratic Party is. The DNC is the Democratic National Committee is packed essentially with corporate lobbyists and with consultants and with people who participated in rigging the 2016 primary. Mm-hmm. And so it's really a version of ALEC, In ALEC, corporations and corporate lobbyists get together and they write policy. Mm-hmm. Well, this is kind of like an even grander version of that, bringing together corporate consultants and corporate lobbyists to essentially govern the country. And that's true for the Democratic Party, and it's true for the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. And something that happened not that long ago, this idea of choosing a candidate that for president, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about how it's done and basically admitting that, it's like the closed door cigars and brandy type situation. And you're like, wow, I can't believe that.
Yeah. That was amazing. And so what happened there was that in 2017, a year after the end of the primaries, the DNC was actually sued mm-hmm. for defrauding millions of Bernie supporters and millions of Democrats. Because inside the DNC's own bylaws, it says you must have an impartial primary. The DNC cannot take sides in primaries. But the DNC flagrantly violated that. It didn't pay attention to it whatsoever. It had an arrangement with the Hillary Clinton campaign where it basically made the DNC an appendage of the Clinton campaign. Mm-hmm. It was called a joint fundraising agreement. And as Donna Brazile admitted the following year too, the arrangement put the entire party apparatuses, hiring, strategy, budget, communications, at the disposal mm-hmm. of the Clinton campaign. Yeah. And it had a second added benefit of allowing the Clinton campaign to launder tens of millions of dollars through state parties, which then went to the DNC, which then went back to the Clinton campaign. In effect, this was circumventing campaign finance laws.
Yeah, and I think maybe it was in that same lawsuit or a different one where they basically said, well, you can't expect us to actually be fair. So it's your fault as the people who were donating money. It's your fault for not knowing that we were corrupt.
That was it. That was the same one. That's right. That was Bruce Spiva, the DNC's attorney, who when confronted with that argument of you rigged the primary, you've defrauded millions of your own, mm-hmm. voters and members, said, they didn't express remorse. They didn't say that we're going to change the rules to ensure this doesn't happen. They didn't say we're going to enforce impartiality, Instead, they said, we have a right to do that.
Yeah.
We have the right to rig the primaries.
That's
we have the right to do it in 2016, in 2018, and in 2020. The attorney actually argued that the primaries are essentially a charade and that the party as a private corporation has the right to pick whomever it wants through its processes. And the quote you were referring to was one of the most incredible that emerged from that trial. And it was that if we want, we can smoke cigars and get together in back rooms and pick the candidates that way like they used to in the good old days.
Yeah. And you're like, wait, wow, that really makes me feel confident about you. So, I mean, and this is what happened in 2016. How do you see that perpetuating? I mean, obviously they haven't gotten rid of superdelegates. What other ways in terms of that first point of trying to run a progressive candidate do you see them slapping down that potential?
Right. So other ways that they've kind of rigged the primary to ensure that a progressive candidate never makes it to the general population, that they never come up in a general ballot for president, and for many other races, as we saw in 2018, is that they block independents from voting in their primaries with closed primaries. So millions of people couldn't vote for Bernie in 2016. Right. They didn't change those rules. Progressives pushed for a change for those rules with the Unity Reform Commission. The party said after 2016, oh, sure, we're going to change the rules. We're going to make it fair, So they created this thing called the Unity Reform Commission. they immediately packed the commission with a bunch of their own corporate lobbyists and consultants, and they stripped the commission of any power to make real changes. They said the Reform Commission, can just make recommendations.
Right.
And the recommendations are going to go to another body called the Rules and Bylaws Committee, on which, by the way, Tom Perez and the establishment Democrats have appointed all 30 committee members. And that's the real body that's going to control the primary rules in 2020 and beyond. And so, of course, what happened is the Unity Reform Commission put out some recommendations, and the Rules and Bylaws Committee shot them all down. And so we still have closed primaries. We still have this phenomenon where the Democratic Party says that in addition to closed primaries, so okay, you're not independents can't vote, but say you're an independent,
because there are so many independents,
millions.
Yeah, independents
are now by far the largest group in the United States. About 45% of Americans are independents. Only 27% are Democrats. 27% are Republicans. So the party went further than that, and it said, well, if you're an independent and you want to switch your affiliation to Democrat to vote, we're not going to let you do that either, because we're going to set the deadline to switch months in advance at a time when most people are not paying attention to the races to switch your affiliation. That's another thing they kept.
So this is what we're looking at in terms of that first point of addressing the progressive dream of running a progressive presidential candidate. What about the second point?
Yeah. So I should give kind of a little overview of all seven.
Yeah.
So the first is that progressives tried to elect, thought, let's try to nominate a progressive for president in the Democratic Party. The second is that progressives thought, after that didn't work, let's try to hold the party's feet to the fire on the platform. After that, after progressives found out the platform is meaningless, it's not enforced, and in fact, the party threw out the delegate platform. The third attempt was, let's try to get a progressive DNC chair. What happened there is that they nominated Keith Ellison, the party forced through, and the donors forced through Tom Perez. And they also opened the floodgates to all corporate money on the DNC. They lifted a ban on corporate money.
It's pretty amazing, because Tom Perez is almost as uninspiring as Hillary. Like, it's almost like the two least inspiring human beings that you could find.
That's true, and it's a very low bar.
Really, truly.
After that, they shot for, as we've been talking about, they shot for a fair primary in 2020. They tried to change the rules. And that didn't work out either, because the party manipulated that process. And following that, they tried to get a progressive wave in the midterms, which the party blocked all but two progressives who were challenging incumbent members of Congress. And then they tried to replace Pelosi. And after that, they have essentially come back to square one, which is, let's try to run a president again inside the Democratic Party, having been systematically blocked and sabotaged in each of these other attempts to take over the party.
So we kind of already touched on the fourth point of the trying to make the primaries more legitimate. Let's go back to the second point of the platform, because I think I remember folks talking about that, like Cornel West was a part of this, organizations like 350.org were throwing in suggestions. And so people felt like, oh yeah, we're going to get on the platform. And then meanwhile, some other folks were back here thinking, does that mean anything? Like, does the platform matter like a shit bit? Like, what are we fighting for? And it seems like that's true. It didn't matter.
It didn't matter. It didn't matter at all. They were right to ask those questions. Because first of all, the Hillary delegates controlled the platform process, even in 2016. And so what we got was a much more conservative platform. For example, Medicare for All, which has long been an overwhelmingly popular policy among Americans, let alone Democrats, wasn't even included. So many other versions. They use the same kind of weasel, mealy mouth language of healthcare, universal access to healthcare or whatever. It's like, how do you, okay, but what's the policy that's going to get us there? But then what they did, what really exposes them is what they did with that platform that emerged from it anyways from the process,
Mm.
because the quadrennial conventions of the Democratic Party, the presidential conventions, are supposed to be the highest authority inside the party to set the rules and create the platform. Well, the platform that emerged from that process was a year later thrown out by the party, in fact, without any consultation to the delegates, without any consultation to the members, the voters. It was thrown out and it was replaced with something called the Better Deal, which was a more conservative version, a much more conservative version. And then just to reinforce how unaccountable the party is, the party didn't even adhere to that platform either.
So, yeah, then why bother having it? But also then why bother having, primaries if you admit that you don't need them and they're a farce? So, I mean, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance they could really throw out because they don't adhere to it.
Exactly. Overall, what you see time and time again through these 7 different attempts and the way that the party responded is the illusion of democracy and the illusion of choice. It's a system that makes it appear as if we have an influence, whereas in reality, when you dig into the rules, when you dig into the processes, it's controlled and it's just meant to keep us in the party.
Well, and people like to point out that blue wave, that happened in 2018. But in reality, if you look at the nuts and bolts, because a lot of people are focusing on Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, and that's great, but that's not the majority of people who won seats. So if you look at it, for instance, on the issue of Medicare for All, the majority of freshmen who came in don't support Medicare for All. So if you really look at it on an issue basis, there was no progressive wave because, like you pointed out, they wouldn't have allowed that.
That's a great point. The expectations in 2016, at the end of 2016, when progressives kind of debated, are we going to go into the Democratic Party? Are we going to form an independent party for working people? The expectations for reforming the Democratic Party of those who went into the Democratic Party were completely out of proportion with what happened. And this is something that needs to be confronted inside the progressive movement, and inside in the U.S. in terms of how legitimate these two parties are, essentially. Because, for example, brand new Congress, their initial vision was to replace all 435, members of Congress. Justice Democrats also, and with our revolution, these organizations inside the Democratic Party were pushing for dozens, of different congressional candidates. In fact, I believe there were 104 congressional candidates who all of these organizations endorsed. And it came down to two that ended up just unseating establishment members of Congress. And so the blue wave was a corporate wave because, like you said, the politicians that came in made the party more conservative. And in fact, those who are the exceptions, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, they just represent they represent the tiny exception in the party. And so we can't, as progressives, take that as the rule, essentially. Right. I mean, in the midterms, to give you an impression, all of the different tools that they whipped out against progressives, I mean, it's just an onslaught of different tools. They flooded races with corporate cash. They knocked progressive candidates off the ballot. They fed opposition research to the media. They forced candidates to spend 3/4 of their fundraising on corporate consultants who happened to sit on the DNC's board. They denied access to voter data. They were shutting that down as well. They were endorsing establishment Democrats, again, violating the impartiality in so many different ways. They were blocking independents from voting, and setting those party affiliation deadlines months in advance. So they really abandoned that pretense that the Democratic Party is impartial in the 2018 midterms, and they just started openly rigging the elections, at every level, particularly at the congressional level, in favor of the establishment.
They seem to be much more brazen and more overt about it. Like, just, this is how we operate. And And at the same time, they still hold on to. I mean, one of the things that and Movement for a People's Party has been working a lot with working people in the labor movement. And this is, of course, this speaks to the sort of arrogance of the Democratic Party, is that they just assume that they'll get they'll get union votes, they'll get the black votes, they'll get the immigrant votes. They just kind of expect that. So there's this sort of arrogance that like we can do whatever we want. We can become more brazen with our rigging and our these absurd practices because we have these people on lock. Who else are they going to vote for?
No, that's exactly right. It's monopoly politics, you know. The Democratic Party thinks, you know, it in 2016, it ran as just the party of I'm not Trump. And here, flash forward 3 years later, 2019, the party is still it has no definition. It has no economic policy, you know, despite wildly popular policies, even like a 70% tax rate, you know, on top marginal tax rate, a Green New Deal, you know, progressive policies across the board, free public college, Medicare for all, a federal jobs guarantee, enormously popular, like 2-to-1, you know, popularity. And the Democratic Party has not picked it up at all because it is so rooted in Wall Street. You know, what I found in my work in the Democratic Party for about a decade, working for John Kerry, Terry McAuliffe, you know, then Bernie lobbying the DNC members, then our revolution, is that you can't even distinguish the Democratic Party and the Republican Party from Wall Street. It's an extension of Wall Street. You know, the people, the institutions are so enmeshed into it. They're so connected, you know, in terms of the boards they sit on, the corporate boards, in terms of their own interests, in terms of the people who have gone through the revolving door. They came from Wall Street. They went into the DNC, you know, or they're lobbyists who are sitting on the DNC for Goldman Sachs, Citgo, you know, Google. And then they go back. They immediately go back, you know, the minute they leave, or they just never leave. They sit on both at the same time.
So you mentioned that they'll just sit there, and that reminded me of this great clip of a young person confronting Feinstein about climate change, and Feinstein saying, "Look, in a really super condescending way, saying, look, I've been doing this for 30 years," and me thinking, well, yeah, that's sort of the issue here. Like, you've been doing this, which is just sort of sitting there festering, sucking like the lifeblood from movements for 30 years. And that reminds me of the other point that you have here about replacing Pelosi, and how that thought was put into motion, and even, you know, the idea of having a progressive chair. But these people are entrenched, and there's no way, like, power concedes nothing. So the idea that Tom Perez wouldn't have been the pick, or that Pelosi would have stepped aside, I mean, it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and it goes to a broader point about the party, the Democratic Party. And that is that in order to be taken over, an institution has to be sufficiently democratic. It has to have democratic institutions and mechanisms to actually elect leadership, to actually recall leadership, you know, to pass binding platforms that are meaningful. The Democratic Party has none of those things. You know, it's like saying that we should take over Walmart, essentially. It doesn't matter how many of the workers want, you know, a $15 minimum wage at Walmart. They don't have the ability to say, you know, 90% of us want this. We're going to elect a new corporate board. That's not how it works. And it's the same way, you know, the capitalist parties, the Democrats, Republicans, are essentially replicas of that. They have a board which is totally detached from the people, and there's no communication. There's no way of placing people there. Those the people who run the party, who write the rules to the primaries, who write the rules to how it's going to operate, what the platform in effect is, the real platform. They're not picked whatsoever. They don't emerge from the membership. Instead, they're appointed from Wall Street.
Yeah, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz even, you know, said this blatantly with regards to candidates. She basically said, like, oh, we want to keep activists from running. Like, that's why we have this system set up. And I was like, wow, again, like, I wasn't expecting you to be so, like, you know, brazen about it, but hey, I guess thanks for being honest.
Right.
And it's the same reason that you can't take over the DNC, because there's no democracy there to reform it or to take it over.
And that reminds me of what they did with the superdelegates, which is a great example of that. And the great example that they're just looking for more sophisticated ways to essentially hoodwink us. So in this case, what they did with the superdelegates is that there was a big progressive push with the Unity Reform Commission in 2017 to eliminate the superdelegates. The party said, no, I don't think we're going to do that. I think instead we're going to move them to the second ballot on the at the presidential nominating convention. But we're going to reserve the right to force a second ballot if we choose. And so, wait a minute, that essentially makes the change irrelevant. That obviates the change. Yeah. And so this is another brilliant way from the Democratic Party of getting around of, media headlines, getting some attention that says Democratic Party, is reducing the role of superdelegates. When in fact, they've just found a more sophisticated way to retain control and kind of emphasize this illusion of, activist popular determination inside the party.
And you see that happening with the conversation around the Green New Deal, which we've mentioned on the show, which is, not perfect, but it's obviously, it would be a big deal, especially for the Democrats. But what they did there, Pelosi said, we're creating a panel on climate change or something. But that panel is basically like as useful as a few people having beers in my living room. Like it has no legislative power.
Yeah, this is a great example. I'm so glad you bring that up. Because what the party did there is, again, emblematic of the way that it operates. And so there was kind of a rebellion against Nancy Pelosi in 2018 afterwards to determine whether she was going to be the speaker again. Now, it's the character of this rebellion is what is really illuminating, though. Because that rebellion came from the right wing of the party. It was coming because Nancy Pelosi is considered by the majority of the House caucus to be out of step with the Democratic Party for being too far left. So they wanted to replace her. And so as part of this drama, in order to get the support from the few progressives that are inside the Democratic Party, the minuscule number, Pelosi promised them a Green New Deal committee. She said, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in particular was pushing hard for this. And so she said, we're going to create it. Well, that was part of the deal through which she got the support of Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and other, those other handful of progressives inside the Democratic Party. Well, flash forward a couple of months. Pelosi said, here's your Green New Deal committee. By the way, I took away its power to pass legislation, to actually put legislation forward, and to subpoena speakers. Yeah. So you have a committee, and it's stripped of the basic powers of what a committee is. So it's essentially there as kind of a gimmick.
Yeah. It's like a round table for, like lunchtime or something. It seems it's useless.
It's a publicity stunt. Right. And the fossil fuel lobby was thrilled.
Yeah.
They said, oh, this is fabulous. It's going to look like something's being done, but nothing's being done at all.
Yeah, and even like the committee members, they had wanted them to not take fossil fuel money. And Democrats were like, oh, no, we can't do that.
Right.
That's a big ask.
So they added insult to injury, just like you're saying, by packing the committee with corporate Democrats who take fossil fuel money. And then when they were confronted by progressives over this, and they said, hold on a minute, those people aren't unbiased in this. What the party said is, no, we have the right to take corporate money. And we can't ask that our members of our party, members of Congress, the Democratic House Caucus, not take corporate money, because that would be a violation of their First Amendment right.
Because
so they channeled Citizens United. Yeah. Exactly. They claim, they say, oh yeah, we got to repeal Citizens United, get money out of politics. But here they are, they're rooting this committee, and the logic behind it in Citizens United.
Yeah, ironic, isn't it? So I mean, basically, the Democrats are all about that, trying to make those nice headlines, and kind of like greenwashing and pinkwashing and all of the other washes. But then if they're actually like backed up into a corner, then they use the excuses of the cigars and the closed doors. They use the excuse of Citizens United. They use the excuse of, oh, you should have known that we were corrupt. Like, so when they're really backed into a corner, they're like, yep, no, that's on me. We're fucked up. I don't know why you keep voting for us, but thanks.
Look at what Obama did in 2008. Speaking about cycles, iterations of kind of progressive attempts to take over the Democratic Party. In 2008, Obama, and it wasn't just him, it was the party that was, behind him on this too. He promised, Medicare for all, a single payer system. He promised to take on special interest money, to get money out of politics. He said he was going to cap carbon. He said he was going to take on mass incarceration. He said he was going to end the wars, bring the troops home. He said he was going to end mass surveillance. He said he was going to pass the Employee Free Choice Act to give full union rights, let people really, really organize in the workplace. Well, working people put him into office and the Democrats into office with a filibuster-proof majority on that platform. He reneged and they reneged on everything.
Yeah. Because, like you said, they don't actually believe those things. They just write those into a platform or into a headline. And then when you get them actually in a place of power, they fall in line behind Wall Street and with their Republican cohorts. So
it's a game the party plays because the party recognizes that these things are popular, but at the same time, it's not accountable to the people. It's accountable to Wall Street. And so what the party does is anytime it finds itself out of power, it appeals to these things. Mm-hmm. The number one thing, the oldest trick in the book is single payer. Single payer. Democrats have been saying that they support single payer for decades. Yeah. And particularly, when they're out of power, they say, oh yeah, just put us back in and we'll give you single payer. Exactly. And the real giveaway, there was one very recently, actually. It was at the beginning of the 116th Congress on January 3rd. And so this was that a number of Democrats have been coming out and saying, oh, yeah, I support single payer. I support a Green New Deal. That's great. Put us back into power. Mm-hmm. Well, on January 3rd, first day of the new Congress, they voted on a new rules package in Congress, put forward by the Democrats. Mm-hmm. This rules package includes a measure called PAYGO. PAYGO is a balanced budget austerity measure that says that you have to balance any increase in spending with an increase in revenue. And it essentially makes it impossible to pass Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, free public college, a jobs guarantee or an infrastructure jobs bill. So basically the entire progressive platform is obviated with this. Well, 99% of House Democrats voted for that. 99%. More than 230 Democrats. Only 3 voted against it. So at the same time that they're telling us, we support these policies, we support these progressive policies, just put us back in office like you've done many times before, and we'll pass them. They're at the same time voting for legislation knowingly that will make it impossible.
So moving ahead now, do you feel like based on, when you give this presentation or when you talk to people about this, do you feel like they kind of know it deep down, even if they don't know all the facts, or are people still buying into the Democratic Party, or what's your feeling with people right now?
Well, this has been going long enough that people are waking up, and that there is, that we're starting to see this kind of sea change in consciousness. Actually, it's actually not recent. It's been happening, for years now. For decades after the Second World War, in the wake of the Green New Deal era, the Democratic Party had overwhelmingly higher affiliation than did the Republican Party or independents. But if you look at the chart, you can see Democratic affiliation falling ever since then, all the way to now, to the point where the number of independents is just taking off like a rocket and approaching 50% of the country. And so that's creating, this real kind of instability in the political system, this massive loss of confidence in the two corporate parties. And it's opening the door for a major new party, and that's what we're pushing for in the Movement for a People's Party and as the labor community campaign for an independent party.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, one of the most recent things that you've been doing is organizing with, labor movement powerhouses, folks that have all told, like, put together hundreds of years of experience organizing in the workplace and organizing workers. And talk about why you wanted to start with that base.
Yeah, this is really, so there's some really exciting organizing going on, like you say, towards building a major new party. So when it comes to unions, unions in the United States are the base of working class power. They have 15 million members, spend more than 100 millions of dollars on elections every cycle. And for decades, they've spent that money on the Democratic Party. And in return, the Democrat, so hundreds of billions of worker dollars, because it's dues-based money, going into supporting the Democratic and the Republican parties. Well, in exchange for that, the Democratic Party has given us plummeting wages, Gilded Age level inequality, job-killing trade deals, completely unaffordable, bankrupting medical bills and student bills as well, tuition bills. That is a return on investment that the corporate bosses would never tolerate.
Right, yeah.
Billions of worker dollars for those policies.
Yeah.
And so now there is a rebellion happening inside the labor movement, just like there is inside the progressive movement, that is saying, we have seen what kind of world the establishment parties have to offer. It's time to build something entirely new.
Yeah. And so talk about that. Talk about what's going on right now and how you're trying to shift this for 2020, because as you note in this presentation, this cycle will just perpetuate. There's no reason for it to change, basically until the Democratic Party eats itself. So how are you trying to use your tactics to address this in the upcoming election?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that as we've gotten together, as we've brought together the labor and progressive movements, because we believe that as a foundational kind of philosophy, that the labor and progressive movements have the combined power to break through this duopoly and to create a major new party, rooted in working people that really represents them, that is different, that is structurally different too, that has leaders who are elected, recallable, a binding platform. These are the internal mechanisms without which a political party or, any institution cannot really be held accountable to its membership. And so that's what we've been doing now, is bringing together those individuals, and some very impressive individuals who we've had join us. I'm happy to say that you're one of them. And as well as Dr. Cornel West, Abby Martin, Chris Hedges, Oliver Stone, Ed Asner, some on the progressive side. In labor, we've had some really remarkable people, who've been organizing, as you said, for decades, either around independent politics and, of course, beating back some of the biggest corporations in the United States and winning, like Baldemar Velasquez, who's president of the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. He's with us as well as on the labor community campaign for an independent party, and he's also an AFLCIO Executive Council member, as was Nancy Woolforth, who is also with us and was Secretary Treasurer of OPEIU. The union. And so these are members, as AFL-CIO Executive Council members. They are at the highest levels of American labor. Yeah. And so it's very significant that at the highest levels of American labor, you have a break from the Democratic Party two-party orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there were some AFLCIO resolutions passed in
Right.
2017 which state just this. And they say that whether the candidates are elected from the Democratic or the Republican Party, the interests of Wall Street have been advanced and the interests of working people have been crushed. And they conclude by saying that the time has passed when we can settle for the lesser of two evils politics.
And that's huge because, I mean, the AFL-CIO, that's, I mean, the biggest there is, right? It's the biggest union organization.
Yeah, it is.
So
Biggest
that's,
collection of unions in the U.S.
yeah, so that's huge.
Yeah.
So talk about, with that, like, are you looking to run a candidate in 2020? Are you looking to, like, how are you going to, you know, to take a drag queen phrase, like, how are you going to sashay out onto the scene?
Our plan is to, you know, as we've had these discussions and as we've brought together more people and organizations representing 15 organizations representing more than 100,000 members in this labor community campaign for an independent party, this coalition. One of the things that we identified that's coming up is that working people are really living on the margins in a way that they haven't been in decades. 80% of Americans are now living paycheck to paycheck. It's about 70% of Americans who can't afford a $1,000 emergency anymore. So there's no more margin of error for people. You know, there was no recovery after the Great Recession. Instead, there was a new plateau, a lower plateau. Well, we're 10 years out from that recession. And the business cycle, that's a staple of capitalism for more than 150 years, you know, guarantees that there will be another recession. You know, there will be another economic downturn before long. That is going to be a shock of tremendous proportions to people who are at this new, who now have, they're at bedrock, have nowhere left to go. The other thing that's going to happen is that we're going to get another rigged Democratic primary. And out of that, there's going to be enormous outrage, as there should be. And a recognition that, wait a minute, we had a great recession and now we're having it again. You know, nothing was fixed. We had a rigged Democratic primary. We're having it again. Nothing was fixed. We need to do things differently. You know, and so that creates a real opening for us to organize, for us to, in the face of those crises that Americans are going to face, to posit a genuine alternative. And so what we want to do that is, over this next year, ahead of those crises, is we really want to build up the coalition. We want to bring more unions in, bring more progressive groups in, bring more activists in, you know, and identify also where it is that we can build labor community assemblies in cities and places across the country that bring together local unions along with community groups and progressive organizations and the community members across the country, so that they can then select candidates to run as independents in state and local offices. And we can begin to elect candidates out of those community assemblies with their support, with the support of the local unions, the support of the local progressive groups. And we can begin to build what is essentially a proto-party of candidates elected as independents for the time being, but a growing amount of them who, as it increases and as we gain more, it provides a real proof of concept that we can have a major new party and we can build it. And even though, you know, it's not a political party, all of these candidates who are running on these slates and all of these candidates who are a part of the labor community campaign for an independent party, they represent essentially an emerging party. And that as we hit these crises, people can see in mass that, look, there's another way of doing things. We can make this a fully fledged, nationally viable political party that is accountable to working people and is made of and for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful It's a powerful concept, but it sounds so doable because you are the antithesis of the existing establishment. You're not out of touch with people. You're talking about local and really like powerful community organizing where you're speaking to people's problems because you're a part of that community. And you're also not sitting on that throne and saying, I just expect a vote. You're acknowledging people's independence and saying like, no, you tell me the candidates that you want, not here is your candidate. And like that big
Exactly.
difference between you and the existing establishment.
That's very important. And so, to take the example of the LA teachers strikes that happened recently, uh, there was an immense backlash from first of all, the city is completely controlled by Democrats. The city council is entirely Democratic. The mayor is Democratic. So it was the Democrats that were trying to privatize the schools and who were continually chipping away at the budget of the public school teachers in LA. Well, the teachers finally went on strike, and they faced a tremendous backlash from the Democratic establishment in the city, but also from the media establishment. And the reason they were able to weather that and win was because they had spent years building the community alliances, and so with parent-teacher associations, and so it was that collaboration. So when the Democratic Party began the onslaught against the unions, the teachers' unions in LA, the community had kind of been inoculated to that by the work that they had done before, and they worked together and they said, no, we don't buy that. You're actually screwing over our kids. And so we need you to make these changes. We need you to better fund the schools, and we need you to pay the teachers better, and we need you to stop privatizing them. And so that's the kind of model that has, it has such tremendous power. And it's not just in the US. We see it in Morena, for example, which is a new party that replaced the establishment parties in Mexico just last year.
Yeah. So, wrapping up, like we obviously have the power. It's just a matter of applying it. So we'll definitely stay up to date on what you're doing. Anything else that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I would like to add that that this is a new era. And so, sometimes when people are confronted with the idea of a new political party or an idea that we could organize working people in a party of our own, we don't have to submit to the Democrats or Republicans or corporate structured parties. They can react with skepticism. Mm-hmm. But it's really important to recognize that we're in a time now like no other. We have tools available to us that no other generation has ever had, organizing tools. We have the internet, and as much as social media giants and others may try to clamp down on us, they cannot put the genie of the internet back in the bottle. The Bernie campaign was a product of the internet through and through. The donations model, was mass grassroots-based donations. The organizing model was distributed organizing online and through, messenger platforms like Slack. So basically the entire thing, was internet based. Yeah. And so it's never been easier to organize as many people to get a message and bypass the traditional gatekeepers of information to as many people as possible before as it is now. And it's never been as possible to set up a mass membership dues-based system as it is now. As we can see, in DSA, for example, that's what powers them. So we have that ability. You combine those new tools. That's one part of kind of this equation. On the other hand, you have what we talked about, which is how people are so fed up. Trust in institutions over the past few decades has just totally collapsed in the United States. And the number of independents has skyrocketed. The number of people calling for major new parties, almost 2 out of every 3 Americans. Mm-hmm. That's another part, is how fed up people are with the system.
And the dire situations, whether that be the income inequality or climate change. Like, I think more and more people are realizing that, oh shit, stuff has to change immediately.
Exactly. That's what's making them so fed up with the system and allowing them to entertain different ways of organizing. That's why you see popularity of socialism skyrocketing in the United States, in particular among young people, is that they're no longer their minds and what they're willing to consider possible is no longer in the establishment box, essentially. Their radical imagination has been kind of reawakened. The last part of it that I'll mention is what's going on abroad, because this is really inspiring. And it shows that others are taking that same frustration against austerity, whether it's in Europe or Latin America, and they're combining it with those new tools that we have, those online big organizing tools. And they are actually throwing out establishment parties that have been in power for decades. This is happening in Spain. Mm-hmm. This is happening in France. This is happening in Greece. This is happening in Chile, in Mexico. Sometimes it goes to the left, sometimes it goes to the right. But this is why it's really important to have a left alternative. In Brazil, for example, far to the right. Yeah. In Mexico, to the left. But it shows that when you combine these tools, it has the power to unseat establishment parties in all these countries that have been ruling those countries for decades. In Mexico's case, a century. Yeah. And the struggle to break from neoliberalism continues in some of these parties, but it shows that this is a new era. We can build something different now.
Visit peoplesparty.org to learn more about Nick's work. We'll be off next week, so you'll have plenty of time to let it marinate and really dig into this. And please really, really do, because it's well past time that we honestly see our two-party electoral system for what it is, a one-party racket. Regardless of the candidates that you may like running as Democrats, the system is structured in a way to ensure that they'll lose. In order to manifest real change, we have to look at solutions outside the confines of that systemic self-preservation. Power concedes nothing. And as Julius Nyerere, the first president of Tanzania, so pointedly put it, the United States is also a one-party state, but with typical American extravagance, they have two of them. And with that, we'll wrap this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Remember to check out that full interview via social media and or podcast. Go to those links. And best way to stay up to date on our work is to sign up for the newsletter at the address below. To those who have donated, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word to help ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout. I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and shoved my shove. I'm not a violent man, but